All right, first time of the year that we've had our good buddy Jay Skurski on from the Buffalo News. He has been covering the Bills for how many seasons now? Is it 20?
Combined, yeah, not all at the News, but it's close enough to that. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
man.
been the news. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you always do a great job, and we certainly respect everything that you have to say when it comes to the Bills because you're close to them, as close as anybody in terms of your coverage. So obviously now we're in the bye week and everybody's talking about the head coach. I mean, that seems to be everything you're hearing on radio and social media and the head coach and what's wrong with him and the team and this, that, and the other thing. So I'm going to start there with you. You're, like I said, you're close. You're at the facility a lot. You're around these guys a lot. You're on the players a lot. You're around the coaches a lot. I'm going to start here because it seems like this is where everything happened. You know, early in the season, people are clamoring, and fans too. And if any fans are watching this and say that they never said this, they're dead wrong. And another thing I want to just quickly put in there, when coaches and players say they don't listen to the noise, I'm going to go back to my statement in a second. But when they say they don't listen to the noise, you really believe that with TV and radio and social media the way it is? Do you really believe they don't know what people are saying and talking about?
No, of course not. I mean, they've got people in their lives. Like maybe they aren't actually, tuning into it. I get that. I can believe some of that, but they've got friends, they've got family members who are seeing it all. So I know that it's getting back to them in some fashion, right? Maybe they're not actively seeking it out, but for them to avoid it completely, I think it's impossible. So yeah, they know what's being said. Do they know every little thing that's being said, every little thing that's being written? No, but I think they understand the general consensus, right? When there is a general consensus week in and week out, they get it, and they know as well as we do, what games matter, why they matter and things like that. They know when they're not playing well. They certainly don't need us to tell them. But I think, you go back to the Dorsey thing this year, right? And the criticism that he was facing, I think the players were well aware of what was being written, what was being said about Ken Dorsey.
So, but let's go back to, when was it, week 2 or 3 or maybe 4 in the season when people were saying, oh, no, wait, we got to protect Josh. And people have said it a lot. And then the coaches start seemingly anyway, decide, okay, that's the route we're going to go, right? We're going to get into his head and tell him to be extra careful and very sensitive to your body and your situation and don't go out there and get hurt. And that's what people, and like I started to say, if anybody's seeing this, says that, oh no, I never said that. Well, you're lying to yourself, because a lot of the Bills fandom did say that early on, because there were times when Josh looked, when he almost always seeks contact, that he has contact made with somebody else, that you're, oh my God, oh no, whoa. I mean, there was that panic sometimes in Bills fans. So for people to say, oh no, I never wanted him to shut it down and be more, I don't believe that for a second. People did. And so they decided to go the route they went. It doesn't work. Dorsey gets fired. So now Josh is back to himself. And all I can think of is that Brady goes in, and I think he said this a little bit in his sort of introductory presser as the new OC or the interim OC. He said something to the effect of, look, he's Josh Allen. I'm not going to tell him what to do, kind of thing, so, I mean, why wouldn't Brady go in and be like, dude, just go be yourself? Like, I'm not going to tell you what to do. You know what you're best at. You know what you're most comfortable at. Do you feel like that's kind of what happened?
Yeah, I think there's some of that for sure. I think that he's playing with a freedom that maybe he wasn't playing with up until that point. I think he was pretty tight, honestly. I think he was tightly wound. And I think the stress of the offense underwhelming, really not performing as well as we've come to expect it. I think all of that added into it. Now, I do think your point about the coaching and the avoiding, the avoidance of taking the hits is certainly played into this a little bit too. And you are absolutely right. Listen, I'll be the first to tell you, I'm hypocritical in some ways, because I did write many times that they had to do better at limiting the amount of punishment that he took, and that it was a situation where the coaching staff, the front office, needed to do a better job of getting through to him. What I think happened was they overcorrected, right? And they coached it out of him entirely. And you couldn't do that, right? That we learned quickly that it's too big of a part of what he does. And Josh Allen's in his 6th season, right? He has been around this league long enough that you have to have faith in him that he is going to know when and how to protect himself. It at a certain point, it becomes on him. Entrust him. Let him be the guy who says, okay, I'm going to run. I'm going to make plays with my legs because I'm good at it. And it's huge for our offense. But when I do that, I've got to be smart about it. And that I think is that balance that it has taken them a long time to find. But listen, you've coached it. You've told Josh what to do in those situations. You've told him to slide. You've told him to get out of bounds. Now you need to trust that he's going to do it. And if he doesn't and he takes a big hit, well, I mean, that's the situation. There's not any more that the coaching staff needs to do in my mind. It has to be dependent on the quarterback making the right decision. But that gets to what your second point there, letting him be himself, letting him play with that freedom. And I know it's a small sample size, just 2 games, but he certainly seems like he's done that in some ways here against the Jets and recently against the Eagles.
Yeah, I don't see Nick Sirianni telling Jalen Hurts not to run. I'm not seeing Andy Reid telling Patrick Mahomes not to improvise. Like that, those would be absolutely absurd, ridiculous things to do. And by the way, in both situations, those quarterbacks could get hurt, right? So I think the point is let your quarterback do what he's best at, and have him actually be the one responsible for protecting himself. Let's move on to the game. What did you think of the kneel down call? I mean, a lot of people have been very critical of this, and they point out the Chiefs with 13 seconds and this, that, and the other thing, and they had a timeout. And, a lot of people are saying, well, he wasted a timeout on, icing the kicker, which statistically shows does virtually nothing to the kickers at this point. But coaches still, for whatever reason, lean on that. So what did you make of that whole situation and him basically hoping to God that they won the coin toss and were able to get that ball first and perhaps go down and score?
Yeah. Well, that's a key point right there, right? They willingly took the ball out of Josh Allen's hands with no guarantee that they were going to see it again, right? They could have lost the coin toss, and with the way that defense was playing, there was a good chance, and it happened, right? It just so happened that it came after a field goal by the Bills. But what happens if the Bills lose that toss and the Eagles do the same thing? They go down and score. And I think, at that point, Sean McDermott's taking even more criticism about the kneel down than he already is. And he's taking quite a bit of it right now. And I think it's entirely justified. I think it's everything that's being said about it is fair. You only need to look at 13 seconds. Sure. I wrote about this. You only need to look back to the Detroit game last year on Thanksgiving, 23 seconds. Now, not a perfect comparison because they did have 3 timeouts in that situation as opposed to just 1, but it took 1 play, 1 36-yard pass to Stephon Diggs to get the ball to the Detroit 39-yard line. At that point, you're in field goal range. You're in the outskirts of field goal range. So it can be done. We've seen it done to the Bills. We've seen the Bills do it to other teams. Yeah, the weather was, not conducive to throwing the ball a lot. Well, guess what? Josh Allen threw for 340 yards. They put up 505 yards of total offense. So the rain, I just don't buy it as an excuse. It wasn't an excuse all game. They did whatever they wanted offensively most of the game. So I absolutely think he should have had an opportunity. I think that you trust. I mean, he was sacked 1 time in that game.
That's right.
This offensive line has done they've done a great job of protecting him. I know the Eagles do have a good defensive line. And and back to what you said originally about the timeout, I hated that burn timeout, the icing the kicker timeout. There's no use for it. There was no need for it. It was a 59-yarder. If anything, I think you helped him. I think you let him get comfortable with the field condition, maybe center himself a little bit more. So, I would have liked to have seen him keep that timeout, and I would have liked to have seen them give Josh Allen a chance.
Let me ask you 2 more questions on the offensive side of the football. Have you noticed, I mean, it's there in the stats, but I think it's been really glaring in the last couple games. Dalton Kincaid has had fantastic first halves, then just goes away in the second half. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, it was against the Jets. I particularly noticed that. I think he had 4 catches for 45 yards in the first quarter, and then maybe only 1 catch the rest of the game. I don't have his numbers right in front of me, but that feels like it was what it was. I'd have to say, going back to the Eagles game, I didn't notice him quite as much as he had maybe the month before. It had come on pretty strong. But obviously Gabe Davis stepped up, had a bigger game against Philadelphia than what we had seen. So Kincaid, his usage, let's remember, he's still a rookie, right? I think there are going to be times where it kind of ebbs and flows a little bit. And, the beginning of the season with Knox and the 12 personnel, It just seemed like he was having a really hard time kind of establishing himself. Knox goes out, and then all of a sudden Kincaid really, sort of jumps up statistically into becoming, like, in my mind, their number 2 receiver, de facto receiver. You call him a tight end, but he was the second most popular target behind Diggs there for quite a while. So I'm not overly concerned necessarily with the maybe the numbers going down in the second half here the last couple of weeks. We've got to remember that he's a rookie. I think he's still doing some good things. My question is, what are they going to do when Knox comes back? And that could be as soon as the Kansas City game after the bye. Are they going back to the 12 personnel, or has this become Dalton Kincaid's show at tight end? That would be a big change. I don't know how it would go over in the locker room. Dawson Knox is a respected guy. He's played a lot of football for this team. But I don't think anybody could look at this and say that they haven't been better in 11 personnel than they were in 12.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And then the other thing, though, I would say, to going back to 12, if they did it a particular way, might work. And I say this because, look, Hardy is virtually inactive this past week. Sherfield does play, but in my opinion, looked like he didn't read the playbook. Like, there were 3 times in that game, and maybe it was more amplified because the game was bigger, right? It was Bills Eagles. It was the game of the week. It was one of the games of the year, obviously. And maybe because Davis ran that route in overtime, we think he went the wrong way because there was no safety over the top. Typically, that would force the guy to go inside, probably. And then Sherfield, I don't know, on those 2 plays, it looked to me like he went the wrong way, and there was some sort of miscommunication, like he didn't even know what was going on. But to me, like, how do those things happen at this time in the season,
Yeah, it's inexcusable. I mean, Gabe Davis and Josh Allen have played a ton of football together, right? I mean, he's on the field for 90% of the snaps week in and week out. And we've seen this miscommunication multiple times now between them. Obviously, it led to an intentional grounding penalty against Cincinnati. You can debate whether that was a justifiable flag or not. I didn't think it was, but so be it. It led to a penalty because of that confusion. They had an opportunity to win the game in overtime, their signature win of the season, I think it would have been. And they're not on the same page again. We are in week 12 of the season now. It just can't continue to happen. And I don't know why those things continue to happen, whether that starts with the coaching, whether that starts in the huddle, communication between Josh and Gabe. But those 2 guys have played so much football together that you wouldn't think that would be possible for them to look like they're not on the same page as often as they are. But, week in and week out, you look at the targets for Davis and the catches that it amounts to. And I know there's a lot of factors, right? It's not just miscommunication, but that's a big one. And in my mind, that, coaching has to take some of the blame there. I'm slow to put it all on Joe Brady. I mean, listen, this guy, has been swimming here, I'm sure, coaching 2 games with virtually no time to prepare for either of them. But I think the wide receivers coach, Adam Henry, has to, that's a fair question for him. What's going on with the communication with those 2? It's unacceptable, and it cost them a really big game.
Yeah, for sure. Let me ask you a couple more things about the game itself. And this really drove me crazy. And the Eagles players even said it in the post-game locker room about the touchdown at the end of the game when Sean, again, late in the game, goes cover 0. And guess what? The Eagles have watched tape of the Bills in similar situations late in games and knew exactly what their defensive play call was going to be. They called the exact play that could beat it, executed it perfectly, and their quarterback runs in for an untouched touchdown. I mean, he's supposed to be a defensive guru and understand that the other team is going to know what you're bringing. They study film too, and yet they get burned again.
Yeah, it felt to me like that, listening to Sean McDermott explain that situation, that he gets anxious. He gets uncomfortable when the defense is on its heels, and he starts to feel like he needs to force the issue. And, that's a change in philosophy, right? From when Leslie Frazier was here. Oftentimes the criticism of Leslie Frazier was they were sitting back. They were just letting the other team do what they wanted to do, giving, lined up too far off the line of scrimmage. Why are you giving them those 6 and 7 yard cushions? It's leading to easy completions that are hurting them, right? Well, Sean, I think, has sort of taken the opposite approach, where when the defense isn't executing and the offense is sort of moving the ball the way that the Eagles were, even the way that Denver was at times. Yeah, obviously, you think back to the 0 blitz hurt them against the Broncos. and he feels like he's got to do something. And what he's got to do is we've got to get pressure, right? And how am I going to get pressure? I'm going to send the house. I've got to make them uncomfortable. And to your point, the Eagles dialed up the perfect play for it. They knew what was coming. And yeah, that's on Sean McDermott. There's no question. He tried to force the issue. He tried to get overly aggressive, and it came back to bite him. And against the quarterback that can scramble the way that Hurts can and can make plays with his legs the way that he can, you run that risk, and it came back to hurt them.
It's interesting. You mentioned the word aggressive, and he was aggressive on defense and passive with Josh Allen on offense.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. it's hard to understand, right?
Yeah.
It's hard. And especially when you have Allen playing the way that he was in that game, I could understand if this was a low scoring affair and the offense wasn't doing anything, but that was quite the opposite of what was going on. This was a bona fide shootout in the second half of this game. You needed to match points, you needed to get yards, and your quarterback was playing his guts out. I mean, that was one of the best games of Allen's career. When you look at the total yardage, the opponent, the stake, everything. I think that was one of the best games that Josh Allen has played in his career. I
know this has been a talking point out there. Do you believe that his Sean McDermott's message has gotten stale? That the process, the 111th, all that stuff. Do you think that's even possible inside that room?
Well, it's possible, yeah. And I think that there's a frustration in that locker room. I think there's a belief amongst the team that they're a better team than what their record shows. Right. I mean, it gets you back to the old Bill Parcells saying, right? You are what your record says you are. But I think, you can look at their combined losses, right? It's 26 points, something like that for 20, right in that area, 25, 26 points. They've lost 6 games, right? So they're right there. It's not like they're getting blown out. I don't think that I honestly don't think that he's lost the locker room. I think that there is a frustration, though, that they're not able to pull out these games. And I think that frustration showed itself in a lot of different ways on the sideline on Sunday. You look at what happened with Shaq Lawson and Jordan Phillips and that situation with the crowd and how much they were getting into it. And I think that showed a lack of discipline, honestly. From that starts with the coaching staff, getting these guys focused on the game and not what's being said in the crowd. And I know that fans can be awful, right? And can say awful things. And I don't doubt that some of that stuff happened, but where was this team's head, right? Collectively, why are they more worried about jawing with fans than they are about making the corrections that they need to make defensively? So, has he lost the locker room? No, I'm not willing to say that yet. I'm not ready to say that. I think we've got 5 for this team. I think this is probably the biggest challenge that Sean McDermott has probably faced in his career. And listen, he's faced a lot of them, right? He came in on a 17-year playoff drought, right? But I do think that he is searching for answers right now. And I think that filters down to the locker room. They're searching for answers too. And I think it can go fast. You look at the support for Dorsey. I thought it was there week 6, week 7, week 5. It disappeared pretty quickly. And I think after that Cincinnati loss, it was pretty much gone. There was a lot of, hey, we're just running the plays that are called coming out of that locker room. And when I start to hear those comments, that's when my antenna goes up. I don't think we're there yet with Sean. But like I said, it doesn't take much for it to go. I think he's dangerous right now in terms of the line that he's walking with that room based on the expectations that this team had coming in that they haven't lived up to.
Yeah, I mean, most people thought they were the Super Bowl favorite coming into the season. Now they're like, I don't know, what, 37-1, 35-1 or something to win the Super Bowl. So they've dropped off considerably from where they were at the very beginning of the season. So I'll return to Coach McDermott in a second. Let's talk about the rest of the schedule. And I maintain, to your point, they've only lost by an average of 4.5, 5 points a game in their 6 losses. And I maintain they have played up to their competition. They have played better against better teams. And that gives me hope going into Kansas City, knowing that Kansas City is certainly not what they were last year or the year before, in my opinion. And then they get Dallas at home. And Dallas has been terrific at home, not so terrific on the road. The weather could be a massive factor in that game. I don't think the Chargers are anything. New England's certainly not anything, although divisional game, you never know in those games. And then Miami at the end. I believe, and I'm trying to combine heart and head on this, but I really believe the Bills do have a good chance to make the playoffs still.
Well, and I think you got to factor in the AFC playoff race too, and how
Sure,
wide
of
open it
course.
is right now. I think Burrow played a huge factor in that, right? Cincinnati kind of dropping out. At least in my mind, I don't know that they're going to be there in the end. I'm not overly impressed with Cleveland playing without Deshaun Watson. Pittsburgh playing with a terrible offense. Now, the issue is that those teams are going to play each other and they're going to get wins, right? You still got to win the games if you're the Bills, but I think that 7th seed, especially in the AFC, is kind of there for the taking.
Sure.
If I were the Bills, though, I wouldn't think that anything less than 10 wins gets it done.
Yep.
So that really only gives you one more loss, right? I think the Bills, if they're being realistic, they have to look at it and say, we got to get to 10. We got to figure out a way to get to 10. And if we do that, I think that'll get us in. The good news is if they get to 10, they've closed the season really strong, right? They have played good football to do it. And that's what you want to be doing going into the playoffs, right? It's all about, we've seen in recent years that it's all about how you're playing going into the playoffs. 2 years ago, they were playing like the best team in football. And they waxed the Patriots, right, in the perfect game in Buffalo. Obviously, 13 seconds happens, but they played a heck of a game up until that point. Last year, they went into the playoffs, I thought, on a pretty down note. Even though they had the 13-3 record, they didn't look like a 13-3 team in my mind going into the playoffs. So if they can do it, if they can go 4-1, if they can get to 10 wins and get into the playoffs, that will have meant they played really good football down the stretch. And if that happens, I think they're a very dangerous team in the playoffs. But listen, a lot's got to happen to that point. And it starts with Kansas City. If they can go in there and get a win, then I think you're looking and saying, hey, can we go 3-1 down the stretch? Yeah, I think that's possible.
And those 3 wins ideally would come against the AFC teams. You really don't want to lose an AFC game in the final 5 if you can afford it. My final question, okay, so what do you think? What's realistic for you in these last 5 games?
Yeah, I think 4-1's realistic. I think they can do it. I think they, offensively, obviously it seems like they found something. They scored 32 and 34, I guess it was, against the Philly. They're averaging 33 points a game with Joe Brady. I think that is an impressive number. The schedule, I think if Miami has already clinched and doesn't have anything to play for, that game probably is not as difficult right now on paper as maybe it sounds. New England, you talked about. The Chargers, I don't think are an overly impressive team. That's still, Herbert scares me a little bit in that one. And that means you've got to split, right, against Dallas and Kansas City. Can they split those 2 games? I think they can. They've played Kansas City pretty tough here the last couple of years in the regular season. I agree with you that I don't think Kansas City looks like world beaters right now. That Andy Reid's going to have them up and ready for that game. And obviously it's Patrick Mahomes at his place. It's not an easy game by any stretch, but I don't think it's a game that you would automatically rule the Bills out of. So, yeah, I think they can do 4-1, and I think that could get them in. I know that might sound a little optimistic sitting at 6-6, but, the bye week is going to give them an opportunity to get healthier. I think it's going to give Joe Brady an opportunity to catch his breath and to really come up with a plan here for the last 5 games. And maybe for Sean McDermott, it's going to give him an opportunity to say, what are we doing wrong defensively? Listen, 3 games this season, they have had a lead given to them by the offense in the final 2 minutes of the game, and they haven't been able to close it out. That's New England, that's Denver, that's Philadelphia. If those 3 games alone go differently, this team is at 9-3 and atop the AFC. So they are close, right? And they've just got to figure out a way to close out games. So I know that may be easier said than done, but if they can figure it out over this 5 games, they could do it.
Yeah, for sure. And last thing, do you really believe at the end of this season that Sean McDermott, this has been the conversation all week because there's no game, and I think people are a little bit bored. Now they're still a little pissed at the Eagle game and its outcome. But do you realistically, what would have to happen for Sean McDermott to not be the head coach of this football team next year?
I'm not there yet. I think it would have to really go south. I'm talking, lose them all or maybe only win one of them like that. And then even then, I'm still not convinced that it's happening. Listen, here's my concern with that, right? Terry Pegula, Sean McDermott reports to Terry Pegula. Brandon Beane reports to Terry Pegula. So it is Terry Pegula's decision. Even if Brandon Beane wanted to, he couldn't do it. And you kind of wonder whether he would even want to because they've came together pretty much, right? Sean came a little bit sooner, but they have been together for a long time here in Buffalo. And my major concern about making a coaching change is not whether or not it's justified. I think if you're looking for reasons, you can find them. And if you're looking for reasons to keep Sean McDermott, you can find those too. My big concern when it comes to Terry Pegula is, who is he listening to? Who is he getting his advice from? They have had turnover after turnover after turnover on the business side of this operation. And I don't know who has Terry Pegula's ear, who he trusts, who he's talking to consult on these things. And I would be scared to death, if I were a Bills fan, of Terry Pegula making a change without a real solid plan as to how we're going to go about and not just replace Sean McDermott, but get better. That's the key, right? And I know you can look at it and say, well, hey, anybody's going to want this job with Josh Allen. And maybe there's part of that that's true. But Terry Pegula still has to, A, make the right decision in firing Sean McDermott, and then B, probably the harder part, make the right decision in replacing him. That is a challenge, and I don't know that he has got the resources and the support right now necessary to make those decisions, because who is he listening to? Who has his ear? They don't have anyone in that organization. On the football side, certainly it's Brandon Beane, obviously, but in the business side, I'd be concerned a lot about who Terry Pegula is listening to.
Very, very interesting. And that's something that we haven't heard a lot of out there, in terms of a talking point about the future of the Bills head coach. Yeah, I agree with you that it would have to be a monumental 5-game failure in all different levels for him to not be the coach next year. I agree with you 100%, dude. Great to see you as always. I kept you a little bit longer than I said I would, and I apologize for that. But everything you say is great, and keep up your great work covering the Bills. And best of luck to your son Elliot and everything he's doing with the new hoop team. He's the big man. He's going to dominate and pound the glass. At how tall is he now?
Oh man, he's what is he, 58 inches? I just still do for his golf club, so he's up to 58 inches. So
all right.
he's got about a 3 or 4 inch height advantage on most of the kids in the league, but he wants the ball handle too. So we got to get him. You got to get him aggressive down there working the glass too.
Hey, listen, Joel Embiid handles the ball, so why the hell not, man?
Exactly.
Good to see you, brother. Thank you for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.